Hello everyone, thank you for joining me. My name is Christine and this is Christine Sews a Lot. Today I'm going to be doing a quick tutorial on sewing French seams, and I am using the Teagan dress by Violet Field Threads. This dress I am sewing for Project Dress a Girl 2022. This is a charitable project being run by Mandy of Mandy Sews for Curves over on Instagram, and on YouTube she's Mandy Sews. I will link the information below if you want to join in on this project. She has all the information that you would need. Now, I chose the Teagan dress for this project because it's really cute, but there's some interesting techniques that are good teachable moments. So I have prepared my pieces. I have already done some of the steps in making this dress. The other day I posted a tutorial about how to add an elastic casing to the back bodice. This is a technique that you could borrow and use on other patterns, and it would be really great for growing children to put in the back of their waistbands to make the trousers last a little longer. I have stage stitched the neckline. The stay stitching of the neckline is important to keep the neckline stable. And if you're like me and you're sewing something over the course of a few days, you have less of a chance of getting the neckline out of shape. This pattern has raglan sleeves, so the neckline is on the bodice back, the bodice front, and both sleeves. So what I did in stay stitching, I used the traditional method. I sew a line within the seam allowance, and I start at one end and I sew down to the center and I stop, and I start at the other end and I sew down to the center and stop. All of these stitches will be hidden in the seam allowance, and it just keeps this from being stretched out. Now this is a very small area. I'm very careful in how I'm handling it, but it's a really good habit to get into. Two things I've done in preparation for today's sewing is I have added my label, Dress a Girl Around the World, for the dress. I added it to the sleeve. I've also really starched them well. And I have done a memory crease for where I'm going to be hemming the sleeve. It is so much easier to create the hem while it's flat. So I like to iron a memory crease, and then when I go and sew the sides, I'll just unfold that portion and sew it in, and then the rest is ready to go for when I'm going to sew up the sleeves. Saves a little time and a little finagling. So I've done that in preparation. So let's get into the French seam. French seams are a great way of finishing the inside of a garment to make it look nice and neat. But in particular, I am using French seams because it will make this a sturdier garment because the seam is enclosed. So I did a quick mock-up of what a French seam is using some scraps I had here on my cutting table. This is the outer. See, we've got a nice look here. And this is the inside seam. That seam is all enclosed. And that's what I'm going to show you how to do. Really, really easy. It just takes a little more time because you're making two passes with the sewing machine. But if you were going to be finishing it off with the serger, it's only a little more effort than that. So let's get into it. I'm going to move the camera down so you can see what I'm doing. I have my bodice front here on the cutting table. I have my two sleeves, and this is my bodice back. I've got them all handy. I'm going to start with the bodice front. Traditionally, when we sew and finish with the serger, we sew with the right sides together. When we French seam, we're going to sew wrong sides together. So I'm going to turn this over. I have my notch here on my left side, and I'm going to match up this seam here wrong side to wrong side. So let's see. That would be this piece. I'm matching them wrong side to wrong side. I've got my notches matched. I'm going to unfold this memory crease on my sleeve, and I'm going to pin these together. Violet Field Threads Patterns has a 1/2 inch seam allowance. So since I am making 2 passes with the sewing machine, I'm going to sew at a 1/4 inch on my first pass while they're wrong sides together. I'm going to trim my seam down, and I'm going to sew it again to enclose the seam at a 1/4 inch. So I think this is a great pattern to practice your French seams. I have pinned my sleeve to the front bodice, wrong sides together. I'm going to go to my sewing machine and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then I'm going to meet you over at the pressing station for the next step. I sewed my first pass with white thread so that you could see better, and I am just going to hit it with the steam iron to set the stitches. This will take out if I had any little puckering. It helps the stitches to lie flat. So the next step is I'm going to open up my seam allowance, and you could just finger press this or you can hit it with the iron. I've got a little bit of a curve here going. I would say if you're doing this for the first time, it's much easier to do this just on the straightaway, so maybe practice with your skirt piece first. What this step does is it makes the next step easier when you go to sew your next seam. It helps the seam to lie flat. So I'm going to work at this a little bit, and then what I'm going to do is I am going to trim this seam allowance down by 1/2. I have trimmed my seam down. I have not clipped into the stitches. And the next step is to turn the garment inside out like this. So you roll your seam so the stitching line is right at the center, and I'm going to hit it with the iron as I go. Okay, so I have rolled that seam and ironed it, and I'm really happy with how it has come out. You could pin this, or if you're like me, you can hit it with some extra spray starch, make it super duper stiff. Hopefully I haven't knocked it out of shape. I did a little bit here with my lazy ways. It's okay. It just really wants to roll correctly since I set those stitches. Okay, so I am going to go and sew at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and that will enclose this. I'm really happy with how my French seam turned out. I'm going to insert a photo here so that you can get a closer look at it. It is fully enclosed if you look at the wrong side of the garment, and if you look at the right side of the garment, it's a beautiful seam, other than I have over spray starched it. Since the seam does not open anymore, I have pushed it towards the sleeve and ironed it down. Let me know if you enjoy doing French seams, or if you just can't be bothered with all the fuss that goes into making them. They do make your garments last longer. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments below. I'd be happy to answer them. So I've completed one sleeve attachment to the front bodice. I'm going to attach my other sleeve to the bodice front, and then I'm going to attach the back bodice, and I'm going to call it a night. Our next mini tutorial, I'm going to show you how to open up this back and create a keyhole opening. And we're going to attach bias tape around the neck opening. And I've extended my bias tape to be longer so that we can tie a bow and tie it in the back as a closure. Dress a Girl Around the World has asked for none of the dresses to contain zippers, ribbons, buttons for closures. They can just pull on over the head, or you can use fabric ties. So with a little modification, the Teagan dress by Violet Field Threads can be closed with a fabric tie instead of the button and loop that was drafted for it. So we're going to make those modifications, and I'm going to show you how in the next mini tutorial. Thanks for joining me. Till next time, happy sewing.